The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1882, and Willa Norton knew before she even opened it that her father was dead. She stood in the dusty main street of Bodie, California, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the paper, reading words that confirmed what her heart already understood. Thomas Norton had passed away in his sleep at his ranch 15 miles outside of town, and everything he owned now belonged to his only daughter. Willa had been living in San Francisco for the past 3 years, working as a seamstress in a respectable shop on Market Street, trying to make something of herself beyond the rough mining town where she had grown up. She was 22 years old now, no longer the wild girl who used to ride her father's horses bareback across the high desert plains. But as she stood there with that telegram clutched in her hand, all those years of city refinement fell away, and she was just a daughter who had lost her father and needed to go home. The journey back to Bodie took 2 days, and with every mile that passed, Willa felt the weight of grief settling deeper into her bones. Her father had raised her alone after her mother died of influenza when Willa was only 7. He had been everything to her, teacher and protector, friend and family. The thought of the ranch without him seemed impossible, like imagining the sun rising in the west. When she finally arrived at the land office in Bodie to begin sorting out her father's affairs, she found a weasel of a man sitting behind the desk where old Mr. Patterson used to work. This new land agent had slicked back hair the color of mud and eyes that never quite met hers directly. His name was Edgar Finch, and he greeted her with a smile that did not reach those shifty eyes. "Miss Norton," he said, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. "I am so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man, truly. However, I am afraid there are some complications regarding his estate." Willa sat down slowly in the wooden chair across from his desk. "What kind of complications?" Finch made a show of flipping through pages, his thin fingers dancing across the paper. "It seems your father had considerable debts. The ranch, I am afraid, was mortgaged heavily. He owed money to several creditors in town, and there were back taxes going back nearly 5 years. "That cannot be right," Willa said firmly. "My father always paid his debts. He was meticulous about such things." "I understand this must be difficult to hear," Finch continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But the documentation is quite clear. After settling all outstanding obligations, I am afraid there will be very little left. Perhaps enough for a small plot in town, but the ranch itself, the cattle, the water rights, all of that will need to be sold to satisfy the creditors." Willa felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "I want to see these documents. I want to see every paper you are referencing." Finch's smile tightened. Of course. But these are complex financial matters, Miss Norton. Perhaps it would be easier if you simply signed over power of attorney to me, and I could handle all of this unpleasantness for you. I could likely salvage something from the wreckage, enough to give you a fresh start elsewhere." Something in his tone made Willa's spine stiffen. Her father had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that Edgar Finch was lying to her face. "I will review the documents myself," she said coldly. "And I will not be signing anything until I understand exactly what my father's financial situation actually was." She left the land office with her hands shaking, not from fear but from rage. Walking down the main street of Bodie, past the saloons and general stores, past the stamp mills that never stopped pounding ore, Willa tried to think clearly. She needed help, but she did not know who to trust. She had been gone for 3 years, and many of the people she had known as a girl had moved on, died in mining accidents, or simply disappeared into the vast western territories. She decided to ride out to the ranch, to see the place with her own eyes before making any decisions. She rented a horse from the livery stable and set out across the high desert valley, following roads she knew by heart even after all this time away. The September sun beat down hot and relentless, and the air smelled of sagebrush and dust. The Norton ranch sat in a valley with a good creek running through it, cottonwood trees providing shade, and grass that stayed green even in the driest months. As Willa rode up to the main house, she saw that everything looked exactly as she remembered it, well-maintained and prosperous. The barn was in good repair, the fences were straight and strong, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. This was not the property of a man drowning in debt. She dismounted and walked through the house, moving from room to room like a ghost. Her father's presence was everywhere, in the books stacked beside his favorite chair, in the pipe still sitting on the mantelpiece, in the photograph of her mother that he had kept on his bedside table for 15 years. Willa sank down onto the edge of his bed and finally let herself cry, great wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. When the tears finally stopped, she began searching through her father's papers. He had kept everything organized in a roll-top desk in the study, and Willa methodically went through every drawer and cubbyhole. What she found confirmed her suspicions. Her father's account books showed no significant debts, no missed tax payments, no mortgages. There were records of cattle sales, of water rights carefully maintained, of a man who ran his affairs with precision and care. Edgar Finch was trying to steal her inheritance. The realization filled Willa with cold fury. She gathered up all of her father's papers, stuffing them into a leather satchel, and rode back to Bodie as the sun was setting. She needed a lawyer, someone who could help her fight Finch in whatever scheme he was running. But lawyers cost money, and Willa had very little of that. She took a room at the boarding house on Main Street, a modest place run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. As Willa sat in her small room that evening, trying to figure out what to do next, she heard men's voices drifting up from the street below. One voice in particular caught her attention, deep and calm, with a slight drawl that marked him as coming from somewhere further south. Curious, Willa went to the window and looked down. A group of cowboys had gathered outside the saloon across the street, and they were talking about a trail drive they had just completed, bringing cattle up from Nevada. The man with the distinctive voice was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that was handsome in a rough, weather-beaten way. He wore the typical gear of a working cowboy, worn denim, leather chaps, a bandana around his neck, and a hat that had seen better days. Something about the way he carried himself, with quiet confidence and an easy authority, made Willa think he might be someone worth talking to. Cowboys traveled constantly, heard all kinds of stories and gossip. Maybe he would know something about Edgar Finch, or maybe he could point her towards someone who could help. She waited until the group began to disperse, then hurried downstairs and caught up with the tall cowboy as he was heading toward the livery stable. "Excuse me," she called out. He turned, and Willa found herself looking into eyes that were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains. Up close, she could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely, "can I help you with something?" Now that she had his attention, Willa was not quite sure how to begin. "My name is Willa Norton," she said. "I apologize for approaching you like this, but I am in need of advice, and you look like a man who might know his way around trouble." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well, I have been known to encounter trouble from time to time. Name's Nathan McCoy." "What kind of advice are you looking for, Miss Norton?" The kind that involves crooked land agents and stolen inheritances, Willa said bluntly. Nathan's expression sharpened with interest. That sounds like a serious matter. Maybe we should discuss this somewhere more private than the middle of the street. They ended up at a small cafe that was still open, one of the few respectable places in Bodie where a man and woman could sit together without causing a scandal. Over coffee, Willa told Nathan everything. Her father's death, Edgar Finch's claims about debts and mortgages, what she had found in her father's papers that contradicted those claims. Nathan listened without interrupting, his full attention focused on her words. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Finally, he said, "I have heard of men like this Finch. They prey on grieving families, forge documents, create fake debts. Usually they work with corrupt officials or judges who will back up their claims in court. It is a nasty business." "So what can I do?" Willa asked, hating the note of desperation that crept into her voice. "I do not have money for a lawyer, and even if I did, I do not know who to trust in this town." Nathan looked at her thoughtfully. "There is a lawyer I know, works out of Carson City. His name is Henry Blackwell, and he is as honest as they come. He has helped people in situations like yours before. The problem is getting him here and convincing him to take the case." "How would I do that?" "Well," Nathan said slowly, "I am headed up to Carson City in a few days anyway, need to collect payment for the cattle drive. I could ride up there, talk to Henry, explain the situation. If he thinks you have a case, he might come back with me. He has been known to work on contingency if he believes justice is being served." Willa stared at him. "Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me." Nathan met her gaze steadily. "My father lost his ranch to men like Edgar Finch when I was 14 years old. Fraudulent debts, forged documents, the whole sordid affair. We could not fight it because we did not have money or knowledge or anyone to help us. My father died bitter and broken 5 years later, never having recovered from losing everything he had built. So when I see someone being swindled the same way, I suppose I take it personally." There was pain in his voice, old and deep, and Willa felt something shift in her chest. "I am sorry about your father," she said softly. "It was a long time ago," Nathan replied, "but maybe I can help make sure your story ends differently than his did." They made plans to meet again before Nathan left for Carson City. He wanted to review her father's papers, to make sure they had everything Henry Blackwell would need to build a case. As they stood to leave the cafe, Willa impulsively reached out and touched Nathan's arm. "Thank you," she said. "I know you do not owe me anything, and I appreciate this more than I can say." Nathan looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face, and something flickered in those storm cloud eyes. "We will get your ranch back, Miss Norton. I promise you that." Over the next 2 days, Nathan and Willa spent hours going through her father's documents, organizing everything into a coherent narrative that would demonstrate Thomas Norton's actual financial situation. They worked in Willa's room at the boarding house, papers spread across every surface, and as they worked, they talked. Willa learned that Nathan had been working as a cowboy since he was 15, drifting from ranch to ranch across Nevada, California, and Arizona. He was 26 now, and though he had saved up enough money to buy his own small spread, he had never felt ready to settle down. "I suppose I am still running from what happened to my father," he admitted. "Afraid that if I put down roots, someone will just tear them up again." "That is no way to live," Willa said gently. "Always running, never building anything permanent." "What about you?" Nathan countered. "You ran to San Francisco, stayed away for 3 years. That is its own kind of running." Willa felt the truth of his words like a punch to the gut. "I thought I wanted something different than ranch life," she said slowly. "I thought I wanted civilization, culture, a world beyond dust and cattle. But the moment I got that telegram, all I wanted was to come home. I suppose we do not always know what we truly need until we are at risk of losing it." Nathan's gaze held hers, intense and searching. "I suppose you are right about that." There was a charge in the air between them, something electric and undeniable. Willa found herself noticing things about Nathan that had nothing to do with her legal troubles. The way his hands moved with practiced efficiency as he sorted papers, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, the unexpected gentleness in his voice when he spoke about his father. She was attracted to him, she realized, not just grateful for his help, but genuinely drawn to him in a way she had not experienced with any of the refined gentlemen she had met in San Francisco. There was something solid about Nathan McCoy, something real and true that called to the part of her that had never really fit into city life. On the third day, Nathan prepared to leave for Carson City. He promised to be back within a week, 2 at most. As he mounted his horse in front of the boarding house, he looked down at Willa with an expression that made her heart race. "Stay away from Edgar Finch while I am gone," he said. "Do not sign anything, do not agree to anything. If he pushes you, tell him you are waiting for family to arrive from back east. Make up an uncle or a cousin, someone who will be here soon." "I can handle Edgar Finch," Willa said, though she appreciated Nathan's concern. "I am sure you can," Nathan replied. "But men like him get dangerous when they realize their schemes are being threatened. Just be careful." He rode out heading north, and Willa watched until he disappeared from view. The days that followed felt impossibly long. She visited the ranch every day, checking on things, making sure the foreman her father had employed was still managing the cattle properly. She avoided the land office, but she could feel Edgar Finch's presence like a spider sitting at the center of a web, waiting for her to stumble into his trap. A week passed, then another day, then 2 more. Willa was beginning to worry that something had gone wrong when finally, on a bright October morning, she saw 2 riders approaching Bodie from the north. Even from a distance, she recognized Nathan's distinctive figure in the saddle, and her heart leaped in a way that had nothing to do with legal matters. The man riding beside Nathan was older, perhaps in his 50s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to courtrooms and conflict. This had to be Henry Blackwell. Willa hurried down from her room to meet them in the street. "Miss Norton," Nathan said as he dismounted, and the warmth in his voice sent a flush of pleasure through her. "I would like you to meet Henry Blackwell, the finest lawyer in Nevada territory." Henry dismounted with the stiffness of someone who had spent too many hours in the saddle. He was dressed more formally than Nathan, in a proper suit and vest, though dust from the trail covered everything. "Miss Norton," he said, shaking her hand firmly, "Nathan has told me about your situation. I have reviewed the documents he brought with him, and I believe we have an excellent case. However, I will need to examine the land office records directly and speak with some of your father's associates to build a complete picture of what Edgar Finch has been doing." "Thank you for coming," Willa said. "I cannot afford much in the way of legal fees right now, but once we resolve this matter, I will make sure you are paid fairly." Henry waved a hand dismissively. "Nathan and I have already discussed terms. If we win, which I fully expect we will, my fee will come from penalties assessed against Finch and any co-conspirators. If we lose, well, I will consider it a learning experience. Now, shall we get to work?" They spent the rest of that day and most of the next gathering evidence. Henry Blackwell proved to be as thorough as he was intelligent. He interviewed people who had done business with Thomas Norton, reviewed county records, and examined every document Edgar Finch had filed in the months leading up to and following Thomas's death. What he uncovered was even worse than Willa had suspected. Edgar Finch had been systematically forging documents for nearly a year, creating false debts not just for her father, but for at least 3 other deceased property owners. He had been working with a corrupt clerk in the county recorder's office and a judge who had recently been appointed to the territorial court. Together, they had stolen thousands of acres and countless head of cattle. "This is a criminal conspiracy," Henry said grimly. "We are not just talking about a civil case anymore. This is fraud on a massive scale." Armed with evidence, Henry Blackwell marched into the land office with Nathan and Willa at his side. Edgar Finch looked up from his desk, and Willa had the satisfaction of seeing his face go pale when he recognized the documents Henry was carrying. "Mr. Finch," Henry said in a voice that could have cut glass, "I am Henry Blackwell, attorney at law, and I am here to inform you that I am representing Miss Willa Norton in all matters pertaining to her father's estate. Furthermore, I have uncovered evidence of systematic fraud in your handling of property records, and I will be presenting that evidence to the United States Marshal by the end of the day." Finch stood up quickly, knocking his chair backward. "You cannot prove anything," he said, but his voice shook. "Those are all legitimate records, properly filed and witnessed. Witnessed by a clerk you have been paying off and approved by a judge you have been colluding with," Henry said calmly. "I have sworn statements, handwriting analysis, and financial records showing payments from your personal accounts to both men. You are finished, Mr. Finch. The only question now is whether you want to make this easier on yourself by confessing and returning the properties you have stolen, or whether you want to drag this through court and add to your eventual prison sentence." The color drained completely from Finch's face. He looked from Henry to Nathan, who stood with his arms crossed and an expression that suggested he would be happy if Finch tried anything foolish, then to Willa. "You little," he started to say, but Nathan stepped forward with a movement so swift and threatening that Finch actually stumbled backward. "Choose your next words very carefully," Nathan said quietly, and there was steel in his voice. Finch swallowed hard and said nothing. Henry smiled coldly. "I thought so. Now, you have 1 hour to gather every document related to the Norton estate and deliver them to the marshal's office. After that, you can explain yourself to federal authorities." They left Edgar Finch standing in his office, looking like a man watching his entire world collapse around him. Out on the street, Willa felt as though she could finally breathe again. "Is it really over?" she asked Henry. "Just like that?" "The legal proceedings will take some time," Henry said. "But yes, the essential matter is resolved. Your father's property will be returned to you without any encumbrances. Finch and his associates will be prosecuted, and I expect they will spend considerable time in prison. Justice, Miss Norton, has been served." Willa turned to Nathan, and without thinking about propriety or scandal, she threw her arms around him. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me, for all of it." Nathan's arms came around her carefully, and she could feel the strength in them, the warmth of his body through the layers of clothing. When she finally stepped back, she saw that Henry Blackwell had diplomatically turned away to examine something in a shop window, giving them a moment of privacy. "I could not have done any of this without you," Willa said, looking up into Nathan's face. The afternoon sun cast shadows across his features, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. "You would have found a way," Nathan said. "You are tougher than you think, Willa Norton." The sound of her given name on his lips sent warmth spiraling through her. "Will you stay?" she asked impulsively. "At least for a little while. I know you need to move on, find another job, but I would appreciate your company while all of this gets sorted out." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a softness that transformed his entire face. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, as federal marshals arrested Edgar Finch and his co-conspirators, as Henry Blackwell worked through the legal procedures to officially restore Willa's inheritance, Nathan stayed in Bodie. He helped out at the Norton Ranch, working alongside the hired hands, fixing things that needed fixing, learning the rhythms of the property. Willa found herself inventing reasons to be wherever Nathan was working. She would bring him water while he mended fences, would ask his opinion on decisions about the cattle, would linger in the barn while he tended to the horses. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing, discovering the thousand small details that make up a person's life. She learned that he had a gift for breaking difficult horses, that he could read even though many cowboys could not, that he loved the novels of James Fenimore Cooper and Mark Twain. He learned that she could shoot better than most men, that she had a beautiful singing voice she rarely let anyone hear, that she had always dreamed of breeding horses on the ranch. The attraction between them deepened into something more, something that made Willa's heart race whenever Nathan entered a room, that made Nathan find excuses to touch her hand or shoulder in passing. But neither of them acted on it. Both held back by some unspoken agreement that they needed to be certain before taking that final step. It was nearly November when everything came to a head. Henry Blackwell had returned to Carson City, his work complete, and all the legal documents had been signed and filed. The Norton Ranch was officially and unquestionably Willa's, free and clear. Edgar Finch and his associates were awaiting trial in the territorial prison. Willa stood in the ranch house one evening, looking around at the home her father had built, feeling both grateful and alone. She had her inheritance back, but her father was still gone, and the man who had helped her recover it was planning to leave. Nathan had told her that morning that he needed to move on, find work for the winter, maybe head down to Arizona where the weather was milder. He was planning to ride out in 2 days, and Willa felt as though something vital was being torn out of her chest. She heard footsteps on the porch and knew without looking that it was Nathan. She had learned to recognize his walk, the particular rhythm of his boots on wood. "Come in," she called before he could knock. Nathan entered, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in a way she had never seen him. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said, "before I head out day after tomorrow." "You do not have to go," Willa said, the words bursting out before she could stop them. "You could stay here, work the ranch with me." "I know it is not what you are used to, being tied to one place, but, Willa," Nathan interrupted, and his voice was rough with emotion. "If I stay, it will not be as a hired hand. It will not be proper or respectable, a single man and a single woman running a ranch together. People would talk, and you have already been through enough scandal with the Finch business. Then do not stay as a hired hand," Willa said, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. "Stay as something else. Stay as someone who means something to me, someone I cannot imagine my life without." Nathan stared at her, and she watched emotions chase across his face too quickly to name. "You are saying, I am saying I love you," Willa said, and once the words were out they felt as natural as breathing. "I know we have only known each other a few weeks, and maybe that is not long enough to be sure, but I am sure, Nathan. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, and I want you to stay, and if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then please, do not ride away the day after tomorrow." Nathan closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face in his calloused hands and looked at her with such intensity that Willa felt her knees weaken. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I have loved you from the moment you chased me down in the street with fire in your eyes, ready to take on the whole world to save your father's ranch. But I am a cowboy with nothing but a horse and a few dollars in savings. You deserve better than that." "You are everything I want," Willa said, reaching up to cover his hands with hers. "You are loyal and brave and kind, and you helped me when you had no reason to." "You are exactly what I need, Nathan McCoy." He kissed her then, and it was like coming home, like finding something she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. His lips were warm and firm against hers, and Willa melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling his hands slide down to her waist and pull her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know people will say we are rushing, but marry me, Willa. Let me stay here as your husband, let me help you build something lasting on this land. Let me love you for the rest of my life." "Yes," Willa breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Bodie. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house stood up as Willa's witness, and one of Nathan's cowboy friends rode up from Nevada to stand up for him. Henry Blackwell even made the trip back from Carson City to attend, bringing a set of law books as a wedding present. It was a simple wedding, nothing like the elaborate affairs Willa had seen in San Francisco, but it was perfect. She wore a dress of ivory silk that she had made herself, and Nathan wore his best shirt and a new vest he had bought specially for the occasion. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through all the days of their lives, Willa felt her father's presence like a blessing, as though he was watching over them and approving. That night, in the ranch house that was now truly theirs, Nathan carried Willa over the threshold and then very carefully, very gently set her down. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "About me, about all of it." In answer, Willa reached up and began unbuttoning his vest, her fingers steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I have never been more sure of anything," she said. They learned each other slowly that night, with care and tenderness, and if Willa had thought she loved Nathan before, it was nothing compared to what she felt as he held her afterward, his breath warm against her hair, his heart beating steady beneath her palm. The winter that followed was harsh, with snow piling up in the passes and temperatures dropping below freezing for weeks at a time. But inside the ranch house, Nathan and Willa built their own warmth. They worked the ranch together, making decisions jointly, and Willa found that Nathan had a keen mind for business. He suggested improvements to their water system, found markets for their cattle that paid better prices, and began a horse breeding program that showed immediate promise. But it was not just the practical partnership that made their marriage strong. It was the way Nathan made her laugh at the end of long, exhausting days. It was the way Willa could talk to him about her father, and he would listen without trying to fix her grief, just holding her while she cried. It was the thousand small kindnesses they showed each other, the touches and glances and words of affection that wove their lives together into something unshakable. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the valley green. Willa stood on the porch one April morning, watching Nathan work with a young colt in the corral, and felt a wave of contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was everything she had ever wanted, though she had not known it until Nathan walked into her life. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Willa took Nathan's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Nathan looked at her, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Are you—" "I am," Willa confirmed. The baby should come in late autumn, around November. Nathan let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby pasture. He swept Willa up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. Then he set her down gently, as though she were made of glass, and kissed her with a sweetness that made her heart overflow. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a family," Willa corrected. "A real family, here on this land that almost got stolen away. We are going to build something that will last, Nathan. Something your father would be proud of, and something my father would have loved to see." Nathan pulled her close, and they stood together as the last light faded from the sky. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "A home, a wife, a child on the way. I thought I would just keep drifting forever, never putting down roots. But you changed everything, Willa. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build, a reason to hope." "You gave me those same things," Willa said. "You saved my home, but more than that, you saved me. You showed me that I could be strong enough to fight for what matters, and you gave me someone worth fighting alongside." The months that followed were busy ones. They hired additional ranch hands as Willa's pregnancy advanced, and Nathan took on more of the physical work. He was fiercely protective of her, always making sure she did not overexert herself, though Willa often had to remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. Henry Blackwell wrote to them in July with news that Edgar Finch and his co-conspirators had been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The properties they had stolen had all been returned to the rightful owners or heirs, and the territorial governor had implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar fraud in the future. "Justice," Nathan said as he finished reading the letter aloud. "Your father got justice, and so did mine, in a way. What Finch and those men did, it was the same thing that happened to my family. I am glad they will pay for it." In late October, as the leaves on the cottonwood trees turned gold and the air took on a crisp edge, Willa went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that lasted through the night and into the following day. Nathan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when Willa wanted to curse at him. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world howling with indignation, his tiny fists waving, and when the midwife placed him in Willa's arms, she fell in love all over again. "He is perfect," she whispered, touching the baby's downy black hair, counting his tiny fingers and toes. Nathan sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Willa's shoulders, staring at their son with an expression of awe. "What should we name him?" he asked. Willa looked down at the baby, then up at her husband. "Thomas," she said, "after my father, Thomas Nathan McCoy." Nathan's eyes grew bright with emotion. "That is a good, strong name," he said hoarsely. "He will grow up knowing about both his grandfathers, about the men they were and the legacies they left." As the years passed, the Norton Ranch, now known as the McCoy Spread, prospered under Nathan and Willa's joint management. Their horse breeding program became renowned throughout California and Nevada, producing animals that were prized for their intelligence, stamina, and temperament. The cattle operation expanded, and they eventually bought the adjacent property when it came up for sale. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter they named Sarah, with Willa's blonde hair and Nathan's gray-blue eyes. 3 years after that came another son, whom they named Henry after the lawyer who had helped them, though they called him Hank to avoid confusion. The children grew up learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were old enough, and understanding that the land they lived on had been fought for and won through courage and determination. Nathan told them stories about their grandfathers, about Thomas Norton, who had built the ranch from nothing, and about his own father who had lost everything but whose memory had inspired Nathan to help someone else keep what was theirs. Willa taught the children to read and do figures, and when they were old enough, they sent them to school in Bodie during the winter months. But the ranch was their true education, teaching them about hard work, about the cycles of life and death, about the satisfaction that came from building something with your own hands. Nathan never lost his skill with horses, and as he aged, he became known as one of the finest trainers in the territory. People came from hundreds of miles away to buy McCoy horses or to ask Nathan to work with their problem animals. He had a patience and gentleness that seemed almost magical, and Willa never tired of watching him in the corral, moving with an assurance that came from deep connection with the creatures he worked with. For her part, Willa became a formidable businesswoman, managing the financial side of their operation with the same fierce determination she had shown when fighting Edgar Finch. She negotiated contracts, maintained relationships with buyers, and invested their profits wisely. By the time she was 35, the McCoy spread was one of the most successful ranching operations in Eastern California. But success and prosperity were never what mattered most to either of them. What mattered were the evenings sitting on the porch watching their children play, the quiet moments in bed before sleep when they would talk about their days, the way Nathan still looked at Willa as though she were the most beautiful woman in the world, the way Willa still felt her heart skip when Nathan walked into a room. They had built something lasting together, something that would endure long after they were gone. Not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy of love and loyalty and fighting for what was right. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Willa by taking her on a trip to San Francisco. They stayed at a fancy hotel, ate at expensive restaurants, and walked along the waterfront where massive ships came and went from ports around the world. It was everything Willa had once thought she wanted when she lived in the city all those years ago. But on the third day, as they stood on a hill overlooking the bay, Willa turned to Nathan and said, "I want to go home." Nathan smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with affection. "Tired of civilization already. I miss the ranch," Willa admitted. "I miss the children. I miss the horses. I miss the way the wind sounds in the cottonwoods and the smell of sage after rain. This city is beautiful, but it is not where I belong anymore. Maybe it never was." "Then let us go home," Nathan said, taking her hand. "Our real life is waiting for us there." They rode back to the ranch together, just the two of them, taking their time, enjoying the journey. When they finally crested the last hill and saw the valley spread out before them, saw the ranch buildings and the cattle grazing and the horses in the pastures, Willa felt such a rush of belonging that it took her breath away. "Thank you," she said to Nathan as they paused to take in the view. "For what?" "For helping me save this place," Willa said. "For staying when you could have left, for building a life here with me, for everything." Nathan leaned over in his saddle and kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of dust and sunshine. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stop running," he said. "For showing me that putting down roots does not mean losing yourself, it means finding yourself. For loving me." They rode down into the valley together, toward the home they had built, toward the family that was waiting for them, toward the life they had created from determination and hope and love. Behind them, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple. Ahead of them lay all the years still to come, full of challenges and joys, hardships and triumphs, but always, always, they would face those years together. Willa Norton McCoy had inherited a ranch and nearly lost it to a corrupt land agent scheme. But what she gained in the process was worth more than any property or money could ever be. She had found love with a cowboy who had brought a lawyer and helped her fight for justice. She had discovered her own strength and courage. She had built a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. And every night for the rest of her life, when she lay down beside her husband in the bed they shared, she thanked whatever fate or fortune had brought Nathan McCoy into her life on that September evening in Bodie, California, all those years ago. He had saved her inheritance, but more importantly, he had given her everything she had never known she needed: partnership, passion, purpose, and a love that would last until the end of their days and beyond.